Before I begin, let's acknowledge that I am certainly not an expert in this field, and while we're at it, let's set some principles for this video. 1. Religion and mythology are simply not the same type of thing. 2. Our definition of myth is a story that creates purpose to natural things, often set in primeval history, or even after written works began to explain some social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural or bizarre beings or events. 3. Religions may contain myths, myths may become of religious importance, and myths may create religions. 4. This video is concerned with how certain myths are marketed differently in the United States depending on how the perceived relevance to an existing practicing religion it has. Now, let's take a look at two books. How would you describe them? Well, out of my very limited 20-count peer questionnaire, more details later, 50% of you would describe the left one as religion/religious, and 55% of you would say the right one is mythological or fantastical. These are both mythologies. When defining myths in this manner, the Bible is a collection of myths alongside poems, genealogies, etc. If we want to extend the definition of myth to explaining morality as well, parables and poems from the Bible also become myths into themselves. And a lot of Christians, and in my experience especially Catholics, recognize this, and in fact when reading the Bible, teach you that you must acknowledge the type of text you're reading to interpret it correctly. So for example, if you're reading a parable, you need to find its non-literal, figurative meaning behind the story. It is important to discern that the word myth, as it is used in everyday life, is actually the second definition of the word from the Oxford American College Dictionary, the source Google uses when you search up terms, by the way. The first definition is a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. So what makes these two books different? Well, the Bible, for one, isn't just myths. It could be inaccurate to call the entire thing a collection of mythologies. Your brain probably immediately classified the kids' Bible as religious and the heroes as a mythology. There's tons of different reasons it could do this, but one of them could be because, on the surface, we treat myths as if they're disconnected from religion, whether we realize it or not. The myths present in the heroes are necessary for its religion. If both of these books were commonly classified as mythologies or as religious texts, there would not be an issue here, unless the Bible was incorrectly called a mythology when it includes more than just myths. So rather, both of these should ideally be viewed as religious texts. But the heroes was infrequently called that in my little study. Only 5% of people, one person, called the heroes a religious text. So what causes us to deny the religious significance of certain myths? Some have incorrectly defined mythologies as dead religions, but this doesn't really check out, and not only because religion and myths are different types of things. If you want to hear from a probably more certified person than I, check out the video in the description by source number 3. It's also just a bad question. Myths are stories and may not inherently contain a worship aspect. Religions are not analogous to stories. Religions are just a belief system which may be oriented around a set of myths. Myths may not be inherently religious and may not be involved particularly with a religion, but most religions are built around myths that validate or explain their beliefs. Myths don't need to contain rituals or practices, whereas religions must contain practices and rituals because, that's what they are. So what's the issue with the Bible, a collection of many myths including likely historically accurate historical and political stories that also explain the world of old, that have been adopted to create rituals, and therefore religion, and a collection of ancient Greek myths that have previously and currently been adopted to create rituals, thus creating religions, being referenced to differently? Well, it alienates the latter from the word religion and alienates the former from the concept of mythologies. Both groups should have equal right to both terms. although both groups do have reasons for remaining linguistically distinct. Another thing I noticed when reviewing my insanely limited study group is that only in the responses for the heroes did anyone mention fairy tales or children. The fairy tale aspect for the heroes makes some sense because the book cover does say fairy tales on it. But both books, the kids' Bible and the heroes, are clearly marketed towards children. No one mentioned that it was a kids' Bible. We can also observe some interesting connections when viewing the responses given by specific respondents. The whole tiny dataset will be in the description if you want to check it out, but I'll highlight a few interesting responses. The first response I received called both texts religious. The second response calls the kids' Bible propaganda and the heroes legends. Now it sounds to me like that respondent thinks religion is propagandistic. So why isn't the heroes also? Why is the heroes just a legend? Number 3 is the first one that starts a trend continued by 6, 8, 11, 14, 16, and 17. Calling the Bible religious and the heroes mythological. Response 9 is emblematic of this video. It calls the heroes fantasy children, but calls the Bible religious. Number 18 calls the heroes historical, while it calls the Bible fantasy, which is a bit of a swap. The 20th respondent described the heroes as morphology, which has many different definitions, and it's unclear as to what it's meant to say, but I take it as this respondent thinks that heroes explains the forms of things such as human nature, and that follows the definition of a myth. And they called the Bible either fiction or nonfiction depending on the person. So what does that say? I don't know. People right this moment worship the gods of Egypt, Greece, and Rome. The movement to resurrect these polytheistic belief systems is called neo-paganism. Most of the neo-pagan religions are reconstructed from religions we would typically only call cults throughout history, and specifically in reference to myths or ancient civilizations, which subsequently correlates these neo-pagan religions with cults and myths in our mind. And we know that cults are dangerous. They sacrifice lambs and babies, and myths are false. Why would you believe anything that's false? I've got a polytheistic religion erasure anecdote for you. When discussing ancient Rome in the Latin language, we never explicitly say that the Roman Empire practiced a religion. We use words like gods, cult, ritual worship, but never specifically point out that there were and still are whole religions about these things. So often in school, we hear that Greek gods had little cults that worshipped them. And I would say that a cult is different than a religion in many different ways, except for the main one, which is they both have rituals. The biggest difference is a cult is more dedicated, but they both have rituals of worship. But the word cult has a much more negative connotation in mainstream US culture, thanks to Heaven's Gate and the like. Using the term cult instead of religion to describe what is more accurately a cult about a particular god within a religion, it's an unconscious attempt at delegitimizing or stigmatizing that religion. The paper Stigmatized Identity in Contemporary Paganism, written by Gwendolyn Rees, explores the many ways neo-pagans are stigmatized in our world. She explains how being a neo-pagan is to have a concealable, stigmatized identity, and elaborates on that by comparing it to being in the LGBTQIA+ community or someone who's been previously incarcerated. I never thought of it that way. If you've been imprisoned, there may not be a physical mark on your body that communicates that idea to others, that says, Jim was in a federal prison for arson charges, but it is nonetheless part of your identity. The author discusses neo-pagans experiencing a wage gap due to workplace discrimination, and mentions several other discriminatory features of society that neo-pagans also experience. Me personally, I do go to a school. Certainly among students, Individuals lean socially liberal most often, and it's never a shock when I learn someone dabbles in paganism. That's really when equality is reached, isn't it? When it's so standard, no one bats an eye. I mention my school's demographics specifically because the little survey I put together and presented at the start of the video was largely taken by students at this school. A good portion of those surveyed were highly religious and many weren't. Some are religiously active, some are culturally religiously active, like celebrating Christmas, and some just have a Western religiously informed worldview. Conservative, liberal, uninterested. I'd say there's a high representation of traditionally liberal and culturally liberal participants, so we've got some fun little nuances everywhere, as always. Anyways, the author uses terms that many will recognize, such as passing or the closet. Actually, apparently, the closet is referred to as the broom closet in their community, which I think is really adorable, and other communities should definitely do the same. When was the last time you heard about pagan discrimination in the news? You don't. They're just silently persecuted all the time. In the US right now, we've been having quite a long fight over abortion and contraception. Another notable issue coming up recently is if trans children should exist, and if their parents should be punished. In some states, people's families may be taken away from them. Everything is wrapped up in Christianity. Everything has to be fighting it. But when did God say that trans children were sinful? Who says that God didn't make you to be trans? And when will the pagan outcry happen? Maybe it's already happening. Maybe it already happened. It was just too quiet. I don't know. Maybe soon they'll show the Judeo-Christian informed mainstream that the old occult and pagan stuff is just fine. Hey, if you care about your Christianity deeply and don't want to get offended, please move forward to
12:25.
Thanks, I'll see you in a bit. Alright, now that the snowflakes are gone, am I right? I mean, of course the occult is fine. If Christian prayers don't really work, why would its polar opposite cause any harm? Why hello, welcome back, the rest of you. How's that organized religion going? For some context, when I was a baby, I was a Catholic, and now I'm an agnostic deist type. Anyways, I think that is going to be it for me today. Always remember to do whatever you can to let harmless people do their thing, and calmly, unrelentingly force harmful people to stop, respectfully. If I did make a good video this time, consider liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing, or doing anything else you think could help the channel. It's highly appreciated. Although the best thing you could do is subscribe, because I did set a goal to get 400 subscribers before the next year, and considering how I have 5 days to go, and just about 70 to 80 subscribers to gain, we should probably get on that. I am announcing a break until January 15th, and there will be a video up on January 15th, and then a video every 5 days from then on. So I will see you then. Thanks for watching. After the end screen, there will be the picture of this episode as always, so you can stick around for that. And you may or may not see me next time. Goodbye. CWG does not pretend to anything other than mention name in this context. CWG does not relate to any other acronym and should not be referred as related